In my last video, I built a pop-top camper shell for my ute. But right now, it's still completely empty on the inside. So in this video, I'm building out the interior, then I'll give you a tour, and we'll spend the night camping to test it out. Let's get started. Okay, here's what I'm thinking. A low storage unit on that side and the back wall, a taller one here on this side, then a pull-out kitchen bench with room for a gas cooker and prep space, somewhere to put a water container and a sink, a fridge that I can get to from both inside and outside, something to power that and charge devices, so a battery system with the solar panel up on the roof. Whoa, alright, slow down. The first thing I actually need is to start with a floor. My favorite way to do this is to cut up some cardboard boxes and line them up around the edges, and then tape them together to make a template. Then using that template to trace the shape onto a piece of plywood so that I can use a jigsaw to cut it out. I'm using a 9mm thick piece of ply here just to keep weight down, and also because that's what I had left over from the last video. And I find jigsaws are always a little inaccurate, especially for straight line cuts. But so long as I stay within a couple of millimeters of the line, I'll still get a good enough fit here. Now that gives me a reference to begin building the pull-out kitchen bench. So I'm cutting down some strawberry flavored 45mm framing timber, which I'll use to support these plywood sides. I want to have a small cutlery drawer slide out from under the bench, so I'm cutting a space for that now before things are assembled. And I promise this will all make sense in a minute, hopefully. To help the alignment for the heavy duty drawer slides I'll be putting in, I have the left and the right sides clamped together so I can drill the pilot holes at the same time. Then I can attach those sides to the framing timber by pre-drilling and countersinking first so the screws don't cause any splits and sit flush into the plywood. I want the gas cooker to sit a little recessed down into the top, so I'll cut away a notch for the igniter dial switch. And hit it with some sandpaper before a few coats of paint. Before the bench tops go on and I lose easy access, I'll attach little scrap wood drawer runners for that cutlery drawer. The bench tops are 18mm thick laminated hardwood panels that I bought pre-made from Bunnings and just cut down a little to fit. And I secured them to the frame with a couple of recessed screws from below. Now with those together I can adjust the fitment of the small cutlery drawer, which I had cobbled together out of leftovers a little earlier in the day. Those of you that have installed drawers before might notice I'm doing something a little odd with these drawer slides. That instead of mounting them to the outside of the drawer box, I'm bolting them to the inside face. This is so I can position the unit as close as possible against the side of the wheel well, which in turn will save a little bit of width space on the inside of the bed. So to do that, I'm screwing blocks into the previously outer facing side of the runners. Once these blocks are screwed down to the floor later on, the kitchen bench will actually slide out over them with the runners completely hidden. Doing it this way is more complicated and does sacrifice a little vertical space for the horizontal, but it's an interesting method that I wanted to try. So here you can see what I was saying about being able to get it right up against the wheel well. And now with that in situ, I can measure up for how the frame of the kitchen unit will fit around it. Again, I'm using 45mm framing timber as the structure for this. I'm not going to get crazy with the joinery, screws are going to be just fine for this application, and it's all going to get painted black anyway. But I am being careful to position the pieces with exposed end grain so they'll either be facing against the floor or covered by another piece. It's a small detail, but it does keep things looking tidier, especially when you're using the cheaper timbers like this. After getting the first few pieces locked in, I pre-cut all the other lengths based off their relative measurements. Then I can just slap together the frame by running a few screws in. The spacing of the bracing is based on getting it to fit over the wheel well, which is why one side is full length while the other side is shorter with a peg leg. Quick fitment check and it's looking good, so I'm going to move on to building the tall frame on the opposite side of the camper. I know I just said I wasn't going to do any joinery, but I need to cross two lengths of timber and it'll be stronger and tidier if I don't need to cut them apart and screw them back together. So a simple half lap joint is going to be perfect for this. With one face of the frame together, I can measure out for the rest of the bracing so that it can sit around the wheel well and stand up on its own. I'm going to need a couple of notches cut out of this frame for something I'm going to add shortly, so I'll do that now. Before I give everything a quick sand and paint the frames. I'm cutting down some leftover bits of ply, which I'm going to form into a storage box. Because I'm using 7mm thick ply, I'm adding strips around the bottom edge for the bottom panel of the box to sit down into. And I've glued wood strips to the side edges to give some more meat for the screws to bite into. And after a quick sand and paint, the box can get fitted up into the frame and the bottom panel dropped in. I'm attaching mounting blocks to sit flush with the two notches that I cut just before, because to give access to the storage box, instead of going with a hinged lid, which would stop me from opening it if there was anything sitting on top, I thought I'd use drawer slides to make the lid a bench top which slides out horizontally. These type of drawer slides aren't designed to be used flat like this, so they won't be able to carry their maximum load ratings, but for what I want to use them for, I think they should be fine, as the proper undermount slides that I could find didn't really suit what I was trying to do. I'll mark the centers where the runners need to go, then detach them from the bases. That makes it easier to lay out where the screws need to go. I'm adding washers in between to act as spacers which will hold the runners and the bench top just slightly apart, and that should give enough clearance to stop them scraping along the frame as it's being opened and closed. I decided to make things a little easier to manage by trimming down the plywood floor panel so it was only the width of the frame. Then I thought, making use of that offcut, I'd make a second piece by flipping and tracing it to give me a left hand and a right hand side floor that would then fit around the wheel wells. I'm screwing the left hand side floor into the bottom of the slide out kitchen bench, then screwing that into the bottom of the bench top frame. So now I have one complete kitchen unit. I do have a little faceplate to tidy up the front, so I'll stick that on now, and then get the whole unit up into the ute. See, it totally all made sense in the end, right? The right hand floor unit goes in there along with the tall frame, and I have 3 separate rails that I'm going to use to join the left and the right units into one continuous U shape, which is, sorry, this is a terrible camera angle, hold on. Okay, so kind of a difficult spot to see, but I'm screwing them together using corner brackets. Here, let me get out of the way. So you can see we've got this U shape going on now. I'm using the same corner brackets to go into the camper shell wall, and screwing the top corner of the frame into the bracing support of the shell, which will support another bench top for use at standing height. I'm just going to drill a few pilot holes while it's in this position, and then I'll whip it out again because it hasn't got any finish on it yet. I want another little platform down below, but there's a pillar in the way which I'll need to mark out and just notch around. Yanking everything back out now that I know it fits, I can screw the right hand side floor into the tall frame to complete the unit. And I'm also adding a couple of hinges to one of the separate back rails, which we'll use in just a minute. And then getting a few coats of water-based finish on the panels, before getting them back into the ute, hopefully for the last time. To close out the right hand and back units, I cut a couple of thin panels which I just screw into the back side of the frames, which pretty much completes the cabinetry, so we can move on to accessorizing. Starting with the electrical system, which consists of a 12 volt 15 litre fridge, 100 watt semi-flexible solar panel, 55 amp hour lithium battery, DC to DC charge controller with solar input, battery enclosure, cables and a roof mount gland. I tried to buy parts that were all essentially plug and play, but I did need to make up one extension cable that would run between the solar panel and the charge controller. On the solar panel end, it needs 2 MC4 connectors, which have a male and female pin crimped onto the positive and negative wires, with the housing clipped in and screwing down to secure the wires. The Anderson connector that goes on the other end also has pins that need crimping first, and while these are unisex, the way they clip into the housing means you need to be careful which way up they're facing. To mount the solar panel, I'm first giving it a wipe down with isopropyl to give the VHB mounting tape a clean surface to stick to. I chose to use a semi-flexible solar panel this time because I can mount it directly to the flat surface of the roof, and it has a super low profile. To bring the solar panel's wires inside the camper in a tidy and waterproof way, I'm using a cable entry gland which can seal around each cable. It is a little bit of a maneuver to keep things tidy while you get the silicone sealant around the flange, so I'm just going to take it real slow. And after securing it down with a few screws, I can smooth out the silicone using water and dish soap. I also put a few screws into the solar panel as backup for the VHB tape. Other than bringing power in from the solar panel, I also want to be able to charge the lithium battery from the engine while I'm driving. To do this, I'm running a positive and negative cable from the car's battery, feeding it down through the engine bay, securing it along the chassis rail, and back up between the cab and the bed and through a hole I put in the edge of the camper. With the solar and engine power now cabled into the camper, I can set up the lithium battery. I bought a pre-made enclosure which already has all the fuses and connections I need pre-assembled inside it, which makes things really easy and actually priced out cheaper than buying the individual parts. I'll secure the base of the enclosure down to the floor with a few screws. And also screw down the charge controller. The lithium battery then fits down into the enclosure. And I can screw the positive and negative terminals in. The output of the charge controller plugs into the battery enclosure. The cable from the engine battery plugs into the DC to DC input for the charge controller. And to tell the controller when the vehicle's running so it knows when to charge, there's a sensor wire that goes into the factory accessory plug in the bed. Lastly, the solar panel wire is connected to the last charge controller input. And everything is secured down with screws and zip ties. Now if I plug my camera battery charger into the USB on the battery enclosure and flip the switch, it works. And I can monitor the power from a Bluetooth app. Now back to those cabinets, because they're actually just sitting in place right now. So I'm bolting a plywood spacer that I made into the factory mounting points that are located on the back edge of the bed, which will let me screw down steel angle brackets along that back wall. Along the sides of the cabinets, I have plywood pieces screwed and bolted between the cabinet frames and the steel mounting brackets of the camper shell, which should lock down the interior from sliding around on the inside. With those in place, I can get the fridge in, which is secured by its position against the walls and a cam lock strap, and is plugged into one of the 12-volt sockets on the battery enclosure. The lid for going over top of the electrical system is a piece of 9mm plywood that I want to cover with a bit of leftover carpet that I have. I've only ever done this using contact adhesive in the past, but this time I wanted to try using staples. It was a little hard to keep the tension on the carpet as it wrapped around the edge because it has no stretch, but this is a quick method and I think it turned out okay. Now I can screw that lid into those hinges that I placed earlier. I glued that strip of wood at the bottom as a spacer to account for the extra thickness of the carpet wrapping around the edge. To complete the top and help lock the fridge in place, I shaped this piece of wood to fit snug between them. Also, if you're wondering why it sits back off that front edge, it's so there's clearance for the bench top to slide out and be supported by that rail. Now, this wouldn't be a further fabrication camper interior without some unnecessarily sci-fi LED strip lights. So I'll cut down 4 lengths, tin and solder each end, and get some heat shrink on there. I've got some aluminium housing that I can screw into the wall, that gives a good surface for the tape backing of the strip light to stick to. And they also have diffusers that fit in over the top. I used a bunch of quick connectors to wire them in parallel to a little touch dimmable switch. That's fun, I like that. To bring some subtlety back to the lighting, I also have these rechargeable magnetic night lights, which put out just enough light to let you see by while not looking like the beacons of Gondor to every bug in your campsite. The underside of the standing bench was looking a little bare, so 4 corner brackets and 2 lengths of broomstick later, I have a place to hang my jackets that I can reach from outside and inside. Probably slightly higher on the importance scale is having my water jug in a good place. I want to have it rest on this edge so that I can just use gravity instead of plumbing a whole pump system. So to stop it sliding around up there, I'm screwing a corner bracket which stops side to side motion, and strapping it down with another cam lock when it's not in use. Since I'm keeping my water source mobile, it made sense to also have a sink that could be used anywhere. And to make it accessible enough that I'll actually wash my dishes, I think this pocket made of bungee cords and a collapsible silicone sink could be the answer. So this driver bit has been in my toolbox for years and I never knew what it was for until I was thinking about how to screw in an eyelet, and now I just feel dumb. Hooking a bungee cord between the eyelets applies a constant pressure to the paper towel roll so that it doesn't unravel itself in the wind. Another practical thing that often gets overlooked is to have a dedicated and easily accessible place for your rubbish. And don't forget a little brush and pan for keeping that floor clean. One of the things I wanted to improve from last video was the comfort up in the sleeping platform. When you're moving yourself around up there, just being on the bare painted plywood does feel a little unfinished and some might say unnecessarily austere. So I'm trimming down some EVA foam mats just to soften the place up a bit and fill in the gaps between the bracing that the mattress will lie over. Oh yeah, that's way comfy. Another little thing I wanted to improve on, or rather de-improve, was the amount of bugs getting inside. I typically leave the back doors open when I'm parked up around camp, so I screwed a bunch of steel pegs in and used some mesh offcuts to make myself a bug curtain. Having gone to the trouble of installing that electrical system, I thought it'd be worth having a dedicated space for my camera batteries to stay charged. So I traced their outlines onto some packaging foam so I could cut little inserts for them. To hold it in place, I made a weird half box out of offcuts, which then sits in above the battery enclosure close to the USB sockets. Continuing down the rabbit hole of esoteric storage optimization, there's a space of blank wall on the camper that's easily reached from multiple angles, which is just begging to have something useful mounted to it. So I've got leftover material from the tent fabric and I think some storage pockets might be fun. Using basting tape to create seams on the long edges, I can then eyeball out the size of the pockets and fold a seam along the top edge, again using basting tape first to give me a sharp edge, as pinning and ironing doesn't really work well on this type of polyester fabric. I'm folding the sides of the pockets onto the reverse side and clipping them in place. No. Office supplies can also be substituted here. Over at the sewing machine, I run along the edges with about a 6mm seam allowance. Coming from a rigid material fabrication background, this is the thing that blew my mind when I learned it. To make a pouch pocket open at the top, you just kind of put a crease in the bottom and smush it down flat. To hold the little folds in place, I'm using the machine to hand wind like 2 stitches on in each corner. The bottom of the backing is trimmed flush with the pocket, and then I'll fold that edge over. Then I want some webbing to cover the bottom of the other pocket and the top edge. You get some sticky gunk buildup on the needle from using the basting tape, so I want to wipe that off first with some cleaner before sewing through thick stuff, because otherwise the needle has too much friction and just snaps. Don't ask me how I know that. Using the forbidden technique, I melt a couple of holes through with the soldering iron to give me a place I can mount screws through. Now there's also a wall on the other side which just so happens to be right next to the water container and the sink, so I thought, wouldn't it be handy if maybe there was soap and dish liquid easily accessible at all times? Well, that's oddly specific, but I think that's easy enough to do. Also, when they're running low, you can store them upside down. Design. Alright, everything I wanted in this camper now has a place, and I think it's time to take it out for a night camping to test it out. So I'm at a local spot here in the lower North Island of New Zealand, and I've got some time before dinner, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to give you a walk around now that I've got everything finished up. The first thing you might notice is that there's a bungee cord around the middle of the tent now, which was recommended to me by several viewers in the last video to help fold the fabric in when opening and closing the top, so thank you for that tip. Let's start on the outside and work our way in. So coming in off the left hand side, there's access to the fridge. It's 15 litres, which is just the right size for me to hold a few days worth of cold food. In the gap below is where I keep my pantry food, and there's quite a lot of extra space there. Kitchen spray for keeping things clean. And I think, yeah, this is where I've got some spare tools and things. Nice large low bench top. If I have things on top but still want to get into the storage below, it just slides forward and I have access to all my kitchen things like pots and pans and bowls and cups and tea and coffee, yeah. Moving around to the back now, we have the pull-out kitchen bench for outside cooking, with space for prep and a single burner ready to go. Below that is the cutlery drawer I finished up, and I made a little insert for the knives out of EVA foam. On the back side it has a magnetic stay which stops it from sliding open when you're driving. Over on the other side of the tailgate I've got more storage, a little step to help climb in and out the back, and because this storage is full length I keep longer items down there as well. To set up the water station I just unstrap it and hang it over the edge. And if I need the sink involved, I have a bit of plywood to slot in the gap of the tailgate so that the pop-out sink can sit below the tap. Of course, I've got the paper towels close to hand and the dish liquid and hand soap. From the right hand side there's the rubbish bin, and I just keep my clothes mostly down here, and up above I've got my jackets hanging, which for some reason feels very luxurious in a camping situation. Let's go ahead and climb inside now, and what I want you to notice is that everything I could reach from the outside can also be reached from the inside, which sounds like an obvious feature to have, but you'd be surprised at how many campers are designed to either be one or the other. Now you can see why I designed the frame like I did. With the pull-out kitchen back inside, I can still get to the cutlery drawer, and I have space to lift the gas cooker out if I need to use it up on the bench. The water container can be spun around, sorry I'm trying to do this one-handed, and you can chuck the sink in down below just like before. And then we've got the rubbish bin and the clothes storage. Under this lid on the back wall is the electrical system, with my camera batteries getting charged from the USB sockets on the lithium battery enclosure, which in turn is charged either by the engine while I'm driving or the solar panel up on the roof. Now let's take a look at the mezzanine level. You can see I've got plenty of space and standing room up here, and if I pull the bed platform out to its full 2-meter length, I still have lots of room for climbing up and down. So let me set up my air mattress and jump on up. Sorry about the security footage camera angle, but I wanted to get everything in view to give you a good idea of the space in a wedge style pop top. I realized I forgot to show you the windows last time, so on the right hand driver's side there's double layer zips of the solid fabric and then the mesh, which can be fully opened and can be used for climbing in and out with a ladder like a rooftop tent, or if you need to evict a bee that flew inside thinking it had found a giant orange flower. On the back and left sides are just single layer windows zipped down from the top, with the mesh sewn into the tent. Well, it had been a scorcher of an arvo, and that river had been tempting me the entire time. So I did give myself a little break to have a splash around. And after doing all that filming, I think I definitely earned myself a beer. I moved to a different site away from the mosquitoes at the river, and with the sun starting to go down, it was absolutely time to get dinner on the go. Since this is my first time using the kitchen out in the wild, I'm keeping the menu simple, and I had a couple of taters I wanted to get cooking first. Building the cutlery drawer and actually the whole pull-out kitchen wasn't something I'd originally planned on doing, but back when I was just cooking on the tailgate, I'd end up with knives and pans and plates just spread out all over, and then I couldn't climb into the back. Whereas now I can keep the cooking on the left hand side, the water on the right hand side, and still have a clear corridor in the middle for climbing in and out. While they're sizzling in the pan, I chopped up the other ingredients for a classic burger. I normally do a smash burger, but the spatula I have with me has holes in it, which turns out doesn't work so good for that. Now, you can tell me how wrong I am, but in my opinion, the American style plastic cheese is the superior cheese for burgers. Maybe that's just fast food Stockholm syndrome talking, but honestly, I prefer it. Alright, so the verdict. My first time cooking with the new setup, I think satisfied is the word I'd use. Having the extra prep space and everything on hand is just super nice. I think my only critique would be I should have put a double burner stovetop in, because now I want to make more complicated meals. After stuffing my face with that burger, I did all the dishes and apparently forgot I had a light I could have turned on above me. Well, better late than never. But it's getting pretty late at this point, so time to close up shop and pack it in for the night. The next morning I got woken up early by the birdsong, which is admittedly very idyllic, but also I would have been okay just to have a sleep in on my Sunday morning. However, the forecast had said strong winds and possibly rain was coming later that day, so I figured I'd better get a wriggle on. And even as I peeled myself out of bed, I could see the weather was changing and those clouds were starting to roll in. I was planning on doing a walk later, but first I need to load up on 2 essential items. The first one being coffee, and the second pancakes. Unfortunately, the wind had picked up so much that it kept blowing out the gas cooker, so I moved inside to the standing height bench. I was mildly worried about setting the tent on fire, so I made sure nothing could get close to it. And on the bright side, this was a great opportunity to test out cooking inside, as that was kind of one of my design criteria goals, along with showing the world how great I am at cooking pancakes, apparently. Also, genuine question, what's your go-to topping for pancakes? I've gone with the savory sweet peanut butter banana maple syrup combo, but I'm curious what I might be missing out on, you know? I love how we've gone from me building a camper in my garage to filming myself eating breakfast and washing dishes, but I do feel like you've gotten to see the complete process in terms of the how and the why, and even if the choices you would have made are different to mine, I hope that seeing what I've done sparks ideas for yourself. Also, I know some of you might be interested in the cost of the fit out. The biggest cost, of course, was the electrical system, which totaled up to around 800 USD, and the rest was like 300 bucks, which was mainly the framing timber and the bench tops, as a lot of the other things I had were just leftovers from building the camper shell itself in the last video, which if you haven't already, you should go check out. Now, the place I want to visit isn't too far from this campsite, so I'm packing things up and bringing down the pop-top tent, which even in these strong winds still only takes like 10 seconds. You just have to wrangle the fabric a little more than usual. Also, if you're enjoying this project and you'd like to see more in the future, click the like button to let me know and maybe consider subscribing to the channel. So I guess that wraps up the overnight camp test. I am absolutely stoked with how it all came out. And if you want to build something similar, I'll put a link down below for more information. Now, the spot I wanted to check out is one of the filming locations for The Lord of the Rings, and as a New Zealander, I am legally obligated to visit. And if you haven't already guessed, this is where they filmed Rivendell. There's not a lot here now except for a few plaques and an archway that they made for tourists to take photos with, but it's worth checking out if you're in the area. Anyway, I had a ton of fun doing this truck camper build and filming this video, so I hope you enjoyed watching along too. See you next time.